people's reactions tell you a lot. Like, you can do A/B testing all day long and you'll find the little changes. And those matter. But for startup founders, it's like, someone's joy when you see it in their eyes. It doesn't hide the 10x effects, the things that are going to like be noteworthy, unobvious.
You joined Google back when it was still a scrappy pre-IPO company. You ended up working on critical projects. What was it like being at Google during that hyper-growth phase?
All startups go through their crazy moments where it feels like you're driving a car down the Autobahn and there's a crazy driver jamming on the gas and the wheels are falling off and you have to figure out how to swap the wheels as you're driving without stopping. No. So like I've used that analogy before, but that's how it felt like. One of the coolest things about being a startup founder is actually that you're trying to create something that lives on beyond you. There's a cool moment when you're like, it'll live past me. You can do that as an engineer with a thing you release that's open source. You could do it as like a product, but as a business, it's like that feedback loop of like, oh, the team would keep executing on this even if I wasn't here is a really cool moment that happens in the startup journey. Maybe we'll see the unicorn single person company founder. Yeah. Maybe. I think of that and it's like, that's a very lonely road. I don't know that that's desirable. And maybe for other people who are wired a little differently, it is, but like it's one of the best parts of being human is to have that advantage of being able to connect with other humans. Don't put your life on hold. Being a whole human can make you a better founder because it connects you with your customers who are in the world.
Nathan,
hey, Brennan.
I'm so amped to have you on the pod.
Super excited to be here.
I've been wanting you on for a long time because out of my whole network, I think you're someone that's just been building tech in a really cool way for a really long time. Just to give the audience a little bit, you helped Google optimize their ad systems. So you were there at Google pre-IPO. You led Google News to expand worldwide. You even launched Google Suggest, which billions of people use every day. So like you've built software that, I've helped build software that, to hundreds of thousands to touch millions, but billions is, the goal, I think, for a lot of entrepreneurs. Yet, doing prep for this conversation, you said something the most engineers overlook, the power of emotion in human context. What opened your eyes to the human element in tech? What was the experience or realization in your career where you thought, wait, we're missing something, we're missing data, we're missing the humanity? Can you tell me a bit about that?
Yeah, I would say a couple things. First, thank you. I mean, it's been a journey, not always the one I anticipated. And I think that's kind of one of the joys of this that we'll hopefully talk about here too. Going back educationally, I had a degree in political science as well as computer science. And I didn't really expect that I was going to go into tech and be an entrepreneur. I thought I was going to go study political economy work and become an academic. And I thought it was a good idea if you were going to do that, to go work in the business world for a little bit.
Okay.
And so, Google as a starting point was sort of, I didn't go in anticipating, oh, my social science side plus my computer science side is a useful thing. I didn't really know how that mattered. I would say, it started to really be apparent, over time in all of the ways that you have to have influence in large organizations and really understand people as customers to build your products well. But I would say the moment it was probably most true was in my first company, Aardvark, when we went deep with one of my friends who used to be at IDEO to help us build a really robust user research practice. And some of the insights that came from that we could talk about a little bit, where it was like, this is a really interesting thing where engineers don't see data the same way as how customers talk about it. So I would say there was like a moment where I was like, oh, I get it. There's these human psychology elements in the work we do in our technology every day, and they have second order effects that are also like game theoretic. And I think game designers experience this all the time. Mm-hmm. There are sectors of tech that know this and understand this, but I think sometimes in focusing just on pure data, we miss some of those human elements and the intuition elements. And I think finding a way to balance both is where the sweet spot tends to be.
Yeah, it's interesting. For me, my experience, because I've always been, I've done some like data engineering and stuff like that, but I've never thought of myself as like a hard coder. And I've always been more on like the sales side when I built startups. And so I've always felt like throughout my career, I've worked with engineers and been like, we need to build shit that matters. And like, that's like, I always value scrappy engineers but really like, over time, I think it's about empathy for humans.
Right.
And I think that's a huge issue in AI today, right? Where it's like we're building incredibly cool stuff.
Right.
But then now they're like, okay, how do we like apply this into like the real world?
Right.
Like there's self-driving cars now, but like, people are still scared to get in them.
Totally.
And so like one of the things that also came up in, an earlier combo that we had is you love focusing on emotions and empathy of the human condition over data and logic. Can you just tell me a bit about that and tell like some of the listeners a bit about that? Because I think that's quite counterintuitive.
It is counterintuitive at first. And then once you get into it, you're like, oh, that makes sense. And I think the part of it is that we as humans, our brains are wired a particular way that isn't changing very fast. And so we don't necessarily keep up with the change rate of technology. And, we're very intuitive gut instinct beings. And a big part of our brains work that way.
I think the only way we can operate right now is gut because the change of AI is happening so fast.
So fast.
Yeah. I was telling someone that I think it's the foundational models are improving 10 to 200% in a given month.
Yeah.
Like, do you think it's like more than that? Or do you think it's less? Or like how, like you're so much closer to this than me.
I would say for a couple years now, I've been sort of picking my mental model for like when I thought video generation would be here, when I thought X would be here. And consistently I've been wrong by 6 months.
Wow.
So I think it's been whatever my intuition has been about the rate. And I think rates are a really interesting part of this. I think it's faster than we appreciate. And the reason is largely, I think, comes from compounding, that these systems can build on themselves to get better and faster. And, we're seeing that with what Anthropic's doing and their latest Claude co-work being built largely with Claude Code.
Yeah.
And
it's almost like a cognitive dissonance as an operator in this space, because I think we're so used to like, oh, the iPhone launched or like Android and then or cloud computing, and then we can absorb the technology and it incrementally improved. And even though that improvement would happen somewhat exponential, we still had years to absorb the technology.
Totally.
Or another framework. I love this with different age generations. So boomers were used to tech adoption over 5 years plus, right? Like the cars coming out or like this or that or records, CDs. Millennials are like, okay, software. So we're used to like every year an iPhone. Gen Z was, okay, like even more like TikTok, stuff like that. And now Gen Alpha, who knows? And so it's like over time, I think we've kind of gotten more used to the compounding effect of technology. But now I actually think it's more than we can even comprehend as humans. Right?
I think that's right. I think there have been, analogous eras in the past, like the people who lived through the invention of radio and electricity, and the late 1800s had a rate of change. But I think you're right. I think it misses some of the compounding effects that we're seeing right now in the technology center of gravity around data and processing power that feed back on themselves. And
I was thinking it's like maybe like the invention of fertilizer or like something like I was thinking about like Malthusian, like Charles Malthus, for those who didn't know, assumed that we would not be able to feed the world. Because he mathematically was like, well, the crop yields are this and we'd never be able to feed the world. Or one of my other favorite math problems is they thought we'd never be able to sustain a railroad across the United States because the trees would rot. And then they invented like the creosote, I believe, to like preserve the logs. And so both those things kind of had like very big compounding changes in society.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other one on my mind a lot lately, as you know, is how we organize. That like the notion of capital and labor and the compounding effects that got created within capitalism, but it shows up in other, different systems. That's been one that I think was a really big compounding effect on humanity that like has reshaped the face of the planet too. And that's what's interesting about that one is it's an idea that has these social constructs, which I'm very, I had the fortune to have a class my freshman year of college that was with more professors than students. It was like a little seminar that Tim Lenoir was a professor of history and philosophy of science, and so he brought in just a who's who list of other professors in the space, and we got to read Marshall McLuhan and Jean Baudrillard and stuff about these systems that were studied in the 1950s, like cybernetics and The notion of McLuhan's "the medium is the message," and Baudrillard, and kind of the notion that the simulation becomes the simulacra and becomes real. And so I think some of these things have these qualities where the idea can reshape things. And I think AI is doing that now. And I think we're in a situation where it's going to do that to some of our fundamental social contracts and constructs.
That's so huge. I feel like, I don't know if you had this, like growing up, I was like, where are my flying cars? Where I like love sci-fi. And then like all of a sudden, boom, I feel like we're here.
Right.
Like, and it's like almost, like I said, a cognitive dissonance and then trying to build and shape companies in this space.
Right.
So like we have a lot of founders that view this podcast. If you're giving advice out there around how they can stay up on like context engineering or like what model frameworks are doing, like how do you stay up on top of these things? And where do you think the market's going in the next 6 months plus?
My main premise would be also, a lot of it is about observing people, listening to the world, really paying attention to how other humans around you are responding and dealing with these things. I think, that's a little bit of where, to me, it shows up in those places where even if you read the academic papers, you don't want to miss the human side of it. So I would, strongly encourage that, because I think you need to, be attached also to how humans are reacting to these things. But then in terms of, keeping up, I think you have to start leveraging the systems themselves to keep up. And that is where there's no substitute for actually doing and engaging. And you have to actually, use these tools deeply. And, if you're an engineer, go make sure you know how a diffusion model is built. It's not impossible to go take the time, do it at small scale, like go back to the beginning, make sure you understand some of the fundamental math so that they're not abstract to you. I think you can do a lot to really understand the primitives of the systems and I think that leads to what they're capable of and what they're not. And I think, similarly understanding and studying or observing the systems around them. And I guess my message here is like also that we are in that system around them. They don't exist in isolation. So even if a data set is static, my favorite example is like wine. Like as a data person, you'd be like, there's a wine spectator score. It's in the database. I sell you the wine on a page that tells you the wine spectator score is 92. The phenomenological version of that is that, hey, you told me that it's a great wine. And so when I drink it, it doesn't actually matter that it does matter. It's still a data point in my experience of how I experience that wine. But the wine is changed because of what you told me about it, or the fact that we had it when we were on a ski trip somewhere. It is altered for me, in my experience, by those human elements of our lives.
Yeah, and I love that analogy, because think about that then happening over every user of every foundational model and every data set being plugged in publicly into the whole thing. And that's why I'm saying from a cognitive standpoint, I actually don't even think we can track the change. Like every time I just keep being surprised, just like you. Totally. And so I'm sitting here and being like, okay, like maybe Nathan, who helped build some of the core foundational stuff at Google, maybe Nathan is more on this than me. And you're like, actually, I'm wrong too.
Yeah, well, I think the place I look to for inspiration is some of those thinkers from the past, philosophers. We share a few in common that we know in our network, who would certainly agree with, going back and rereading, some of my foundational, things I read ages back. But the cybernetics people would definitely say, like, yes, the systems become so complex that you actually can't fully scrutinize and control the insides of them. And so you really have to focus on the outputs of them and really understand the interfaces. And I guess I sum it up pretty simply in my own view of like how to build product and how to understand consumers, which is the intuition part, but it also shows up in how you might interview someone or observe them using your product. Just like, it doesn't lie. People's reactions tell you a lot. Like you can do A/B testing all day long and you'll find the little changes. And those matter. But for startup founders, it's like, someone's joy when you see it in their eyes. It doesn't hide. The 10x effects, the things that are going to like be noteworthy aren't unobvious. I don't actually know if the origin story of the iPad is this. So, but I think of it as like just a good example of like, I like to believe that, Steve Jobs was on an airplane watching people hunched over their laptops, half folded over, trying to watch a video, right? And he's like, "Oh, this is a problem. I'm just observing that there's a problem in the world that's kind of obvious in retrospect." But
or the original iPhone probably was like, do you remember those like tiny screens on the back? It's like I can barely read my thing, but it's like you should blow that screen up, right? It's simplicity, which is we had Dave Blakely on from IDEO on the podcast, and we talked a lot about simplicity and users and product design, which I think they're like best in class at doing that.
Right.
I promise I'll move off the Google thing in a little bit.
Fine.
But do you have any early lore from the Google News days, or how you guys were thinking about building certain products? Or like, especially, there's obviously so much data and logic in that, but how did you think about the humans when you were building these systems?
I mean, I actually think we were one of the earliest teams really doing kind of customer-oriented machine learning and design baked into the essence of the product. I mean, the product at the end of the day is actually somewhat simple. The hard work is actually figuring out what all the news stories were being written about in the world.
Yeah.
There's the mechanics of crawling them and keeping them up to date and having good structured data for them. But a big part of it was like, how do you understand how editors are ranking those in different places around the world and different locales around the world, and the cultural nuances and differences between, Japanese news and Chinese news and Southern American news in Latin American countries. There's a lot of difference that we had to adapt to before we were going to be ready to roll it out. And I rolled it out across with the team 40 or 50 different country language markets globally. And
one of my favorite things to do is when I travel, I open up Google News and I open up Reddit to see the local stuff without a VPN or anything.
Right.
Because I'm just like, wow, that's so interesting to me.
Right.
Because it's like, it's very personalized.
Right. And so here we had to, build algorithms that were localized. And it wasn't that Google didn't do that either. They did, but it was like more of language based. And we were doing language and locale, which, there were different expectations of what sections you should have in different, places around the world in terms of what makes a good newspaper and what editors were wanting to see. So that's kind of an example of like, how do you work with a team focused on places? And, we went serially. So we went, place by place, and we had ways to evaluate quality and all the things that we do now, but are localized. And I think you're seeing that happen in a lot of the AI modeling now.
Yeah.
And if you look at a lot of the AI training data sets that Invisible has recruiting out for, a lot of them are specialized niche areas in specialized locales and languages.
Yeah. So it's getting more and more specific.
Yeah.
Which is quite interesting. All right. You completed in athletics and public speaking.
Yeah.
And you said those taught you a lot about training, risk, and especially focusing on long-term improvement.
Right.
And avoiding injury and burnout.
Right.
And that's something I love to talk on, because I think being in a flow state as a founder is the pinnacle thing. And that's like where you can max the most value. And I spend a lot of time myself doing that. And so I talk about it a lot. Can you tell me a bit about like how those things have combined into your life and your success and how you build as a founder?
Totally. I mean, I think it's probably the easiest way. I'm a distance runner too, so I have a bias here.
Shit.
But in that bias, I would say it's a marathon, not a sprint. Like that's one of the things that I often find myself saying to teams over the years, that startups are not about, it's not about racing to the end of the week and burning yourself out, I think. So that's one that I think is notable. And then I had the privilege of running with a number of Olympians, and Michael Stember was one of them. And he said something to us when we were going on races up the Stanford golf course where there's like a ridiculously hard hill. And he was like, look, in the middle of the race, you're going to be hurting. You're going to be in pain. And when you cross that hill, don't forget, take that step and take in the view. Enjoy it. Make sure you enjoy those moments. And Jess Lee, old colleague at Sequoia now, she, when she was an entrepreneur, or maybe she posted it when she was at Sequoia, I'm not sure, but she has a blog post somewhere that like, she draws a line kind of up and to the right at a 45-degree angle. And then you draw a sine wave on it. And she says, that's what the founder experience feels like. Even if you're succeeding, you're getting better all the time, 45-degree angle. But if you actually look at that line, most of the period of time is the x-axis. Most of the time you're going flat on the curve or going down.
Yeah.
And then your growth happens in like these bursty ways.
Yeah.
And so if you don't reflect on that and you move on immediately to the very next thing, like you miss those opportunities, because there's always the next thing. There's always the next stage of growth. And so for me, those are a couple of them. Another one on the risk front, is injury. Like you would have these Olympians that I was running with, and they there were people whose entire Olympic dream failed because they got a stress fracture at the wrong time. So a big part of it is timing, but a big part of it is also like managing your own ability for your own body, your own health, to like be on that extreme edge of performance,
Yeah.
your body can break. And you have to remember that like if it breaks, that's an even bigger deal for the company, right? It's a bigger deal for you if you've trained for 3 years to go to the Olympics and you get a stress fracture because you pushed it just a little too hard, too fast.
One of my favorite, I think it was a tweet that Alexis Ohanian, the founder of Reddit, for those who don't know, said, this is my wording of it, is it's like incredibly arrogant that you think you can grind your way into $1 billion company. It's like, of course you need to work hard, but it's actually about, like what I took away from that is like, it's about being present to then see the, like we're all playing a power law game from an investor perspective. But like as a founder perspective, we also are playing a power law game where it's like, should I go have coffee with Nathan? And what about if like we talk about this thing and then, I have an intro here to that killer investor, or I hire that killer team member, and then it 10x's my whole company. And that's the thing that I took away from what you just said, which was like presence matters, but then you're playing power law. And if you try to like grind out, you're going to ignore the whole power law component of the whole thing.
I think that's right. I mean, I think there's a compounding in human networks too. Maybe we'll see the unicorn single person company founder, maybe. But I don't know. I think of that and it's like, that's a very lonely road. Like, I don't know that that's desirable, right? Like, and maybe for other people who are wired a little differently, it is, you know, but like, it's one of the best parts of being human is to have that advantage of being able to connect with other humans and have that feedback effect. And so I think we as humans have a compounding effect, which we could talk about a lot in our networks. And I think we misrepresent them sometimes as data, right? Like, but they're human relationships.
I always reminisce about the old days of, like it's so fun when it's just 5 of you or 3 of you building a startup. There's a lot of pain in those times and it's not enjoyable, but then you think back through it, it's a lot of fun. And I think that's an interesting tidbit that I'd take away from that. Can you tell me more about how you're thinking about the compounding effects of humans and like not data? Because for me, I've always been a hyper connector. And I come from a couple generations of salespeople. You know, my dad sold John Deere tractors his whole life.
No way. I didn't know that.
Yeah, big combines. And so, and Caterpillar too, but mainly John Deere. And he was like always about empathy with farmers, and farmers had to be, you know, like you're asking a farmer to outlay $500,000. It's highly volatile. It's a family business. They're like really, like, I don't know how many viewers have like gone talk to farmers. They're like very direct, salt of the earth folks, like, you know, and you don't sell it to them by bullshitting. You have empathy, you provide a good product at the right time, and you work really hard, and then they give you their business. And so that's how my dad always taught me to sell. And I brought that into founding for me. And I think that's what's given me a better take, is because I just dive into empathy and then connection nodes. So if I want to I'm like, wow, Nathan's really amazing. Let's get him on the podcast. I wouldn't like cold email you to get you on the podcast. It's like we build a friendship, and then now you're like, wow, let's come to the podcast. And then this is amazing. Is that like kind of what you're talking about with like the compounding effect of humanity?
Yes. It also that it's game theoretic. So there's like a second order game, which is that authenticity shows up. And sometimes I say this and I think it can be misinterpreted, but like some of it is about karma in a way of like doing it for the right reason, not expecting to get anything back. And I think that the thing is that other humans can perceive that.
Yes.
And that's where you get some of this feedback effect.
My statement is more bro-y, so I might take your statement, but I call it trust hacking. And so when I train my salespeople, I'm like, trust hack. I was like, never, when you go to a conference, like one of our founders, they were going to like an exclusive founder event dinner. And I was like, mention your product, but like, do not sell at this period. Like just make good connections and like literally try to see if you can help people.
Help people.
And literally if you can help people, good things flow back your way. And so I came from banking before, so I was a little bro-y. So I now adopt karmic, good karma.
Yeah, well, and I think the interesting thing about the karma approach is that it asks you to go one level in your meta expectation, which is to do it even with no expectation that there's something coming back to you.
I almost do it as like, I have faith in the universe
Yeah.
that it will work out. So I literally, like, I've now hit a point where I'm like, I have no usury behind it.
Right.
It's like, I will just help to help because
Right.
others have helped, and I believe in like the cosmic helping.
Right. I agree. And this is actually one of the things that is great in the entrepreneurial network is there is that old-fashioned ethos of like just helping others who are going down the hard journey of starting something. And we were living in Ann Arbor at the Center for Entrepreneurship at U of M. And
nice.
One of my students, we had a whole session where they asked me to teach something on networking and et cetera. One of them had a need to find a technical co-founder and asked me how to do that. And these are students in classes with each other. And I was like, well, the answer is actually to go find the place in university where you can be helpful to the people who are technical.
Yeah.
Probably one of the subjects that they struggle with. So go find them in those classes and partner up with them about things that you're good at. Be helpful.
It's great advice.
And the rest will follow. And, several months later it did, and this person's gone on to do great things.
People are people, man. And I feel like everyone does try to I like your point about everyone tries to data or logic up, and it's like help people, be empathetic. For me, I used to advise college kids on getting their first job. And one of my favorite things to do is an informational interview. And I actually still do this when I'm first starting to sell.
Yeah.
But essentially what I do is I go to people who I think could beat up my product the most. And I'd say, look, I'm thinking about building this product. Tell me why this isn't going to work. Right. And it first gives them permission. And I also start meetings I'm not going to sell you anything. I don't want to sell you anything. Right. I just want to buy you a coffee for your time. Right. So it removes that. Then I'm like, please, tell me how this won't work. Tell me this. And then at the end, I go, okay, do you have anyone else good for me to talk to that you think could be helpful? They always give me 1 to 2 people. And then I just repeat that. And then eventually over time, they're like, wait, hey, can I be an advisor? Or this is really, if you pull this off, I'll definitely be a customer. Right. And that's literally how I always get one of my first design partners, my first advisors.
Completely.
Always.
Yeah. And it's built off of that, part of our humanity that's been true forever. Even if we organize it differently over different societies and in different structures. And I think that's what's kind of beautiful about that. Is it thinking about how that fits in the current moment is I think really interesting, because I think there's parts of these discussions that are about what parts of work get replaced with AI.
Yeah.
And the parts that actually I think are deeply interesting are part of this human interaction that actually on the optimistic side see a version where AI helps us have more of these human interactions that are meaningful and us to push our own ideas forward.
I see it as, in Keynesian economics, capitalism was supposed to automate, and we were supposed to have a 3-day work week, and we were supposed to pursue the arts and the passion. We weren't supposed to, toil away and do nothing jobs. We were supposed to automate, and then wealth was supposed to accumulate, and we were supposed to create more. And what I hope is that in the best case, AI enables other entrepreneurs, and it enables the creation of so many beautiful things. We talk a lot about the dystopian side of the whole thing, because I think we watch a lot of Terminator.
And I think we should be very cautious of it and aware of those possibilities. Yeah. Those are outcomes to be rightly concerned and, manage against. But I agree with you. I mean, this is where a lot of my passion and energy is going to right now, which is my own next thing, which is around helping that entrepreneurial spirit move forward and, really, really helping humans do a better job being humans at its core, at the stuff that we're great at.
Yeah.
I think that's where a bunch of the solutions will lie, too. And that a lot of the, the reshaping of things, what's valuable. Sure, data is valuable. Sure, a bunch of compute is valuable still.
Yeah.
But I think networks become highly valuable. I think communities become highly valuable. And I think that's because that part of our human condition won't go away. Right.
I also think all that's almost impossible to map inside AI itself, right? Most of the public available data, or if not all on the internet, has been sucked into the models. Right. Now, companies Visible, Mercor, everyone is building training teams to get the non-public data. Right. Robotics is going to start mapping the 3D world around us. But then what's still not mapped is actually our human connections and the human network effect.
And I think we over time change those too. So they are a construct that's the output of how we interact as humans too. So as we shift, it it also shifts and becomes something new and different. And I think it'll be, that's going to be both challenging because it's a lot of change fast, but I think also there are analogs in history where that change leads to really good things and standards of living that rise. And and I think I'm on the optimistic side of things. But
same. I think that's why we're founders. So since you're an optimist, I want to piece together a couple things. Since you're an optimist and the tech is accelerating faster than you expect by 6 months plus every time.
Right.
What do you think a bad outcome is, or what do you think are risks we should be thinking about as a society? I think there's some camps of people that are we should be slowing down because even if it's a low likelihood, it's just such a bad outcome. This could be huge. So can you pontificate a bit on the dangers you think that are there?
Yes, I can absolutely pontificate. I don't know that I'm the right person to pontificate about all of them, but I'll say a couple things. One, from history, the word sabotage comes from the Dutch shoe sabots that were thrown into the machines because of the upending of people's lives by factories. Humans have agency in this, societies have agency in this, and there's not one cookie cutter society. So the differences of how things are being done in Japan are different than here and different in Europe. And I think we will be wrong to assume that all of those cultures and societies will adapt the same way. And I think, there's a choice in there that I think we as a collective society get to make. Just as there are communities and networks that are gilded, they have to be licensed. They're embedded in state licensing regulations that you have to have a license to do certain professions. And those are rules encoded in our societal contract that are unique to our societal contract. And those can be changed. Those can evolve. And I think our system's generally designed to slow those changes, which is, at the time that tech is accelerating.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the fundamental tensions that you're kind of pointing out a lot of these things do come back to time. And it shows up in a lot of the compounding work and the things that I've played with and my teams have done. That almost this notion of hyper time, that you can do things in the data and with the models that you can't do in the real world at a much more accelerated pace. And so those things live in tension with the pace at which humans can do things and humans can react, and the pace at which our culture can evolve.
Even as much as we can understand it. Right.
Totally. The Amish are one of my favorite studies. There was a New York Times piece maybe 15 years ago on this, and I can send it to you later.
Yeah, please.
About the intentionality with which how their society has approached technology. So they would not let people get phones right away.
Yeah.
Because they observe technology first and how it's good or bad, and then they make intentional choices in their culture and the rules of their culture about how to do that. And so phones, when they, if I remember it right, when they allowed phones in, you had to leave and go out into the fields to take phone calls. You couldn't do it in polite company.
Yeah.
And we have a whole bunch of unwritten ones that are in, American society and European society, and those are different.
Yeah.
I would say the good cases lie or where we're intentional about that a little more. I don't think we have a good track record of that.
No.
Australia is a good example for social media, but it's probably 5-10 years later than it should have been. The evidence was kind of emerging a while ago that social media for kids is not great.
I had a college professor, and I love Roman history. And the interesting thing about Rome with technology, thinking about societies absorbing technology, is they had steam power, they had brain surgery, they had all this crazy stuff. But then it was why didn't they have an industrial revolution? And the thesis was that because they didn't have 1,000 slaves working on an estate to then make money and advance and grow bigger, they had that for prestige. So their whole society was built around prestige.
Right.
So they created for prestige and social hierarchy. Or they would go conquer, right? They'd go send an army into Gaul to conquer.
Right.
And it was for prestige, and then they'd parade them through the cities.
Right.
And so in that standpoint, capitalism and technology wasn't advanced.
Right.
Even though they had all the raw materials to do it.
Right.
And I think what you're kind of saying is that AI will be really different in a lot of different societies depending on how we choose to interact with it. And some of that is, because I opened it with well, what's the great risk? Some of it is a risk that if we make people have less than, or if we cause social upheaval, or that could be really good and empowering, and,
Right.
and we get to kind of decide that and self-impose it.
Right. Yeah, one of the entrepreneurs in my portfolio, his provocative statement was like, if you tell people about what you're working on and they punch you in the face, like the Dutch Sabo, right? Like that's a pretty solid reaction that like how it's sitting with society is not great. And I think we're headed to some of those moments potentially in the way like some of it is maybe being approached. And I think that is maybe an argument for being thoughtful about it, even if it's not necessarily saying slow down.
You'd think that like the very large foundational model companies or, Google or Meta, like you think that they would almost do a public works level campaign on the scale of like the Great Depression for middle class communities and rural communities, because like they could give, Starlink could give internet everywhere, or like, you could come in and like rebuild school programs. You could like do all sorts of stuff that would actually, there is like a French terror moment of society. It's like if you have too much of a Gilded Age situation, people want to punch you in the face.
Right. Totally. I mean, in Korea, they also made a choice to give broadband to everybody, and they invested in that because of the like, the second order effects that come later of doing that. And so it's one of the most connected countries in the world that's prepared. And, we haven't done that. I live in a very rural place, and, it's Starlink's been a really big sea change, and having multiple paths to get connected is I think, part of, that's just a great example of that, where like private enterprise can be transformative, and private capitalism. I am a believer that you can, use resources to generate surpluses that feed back on them, which is like the essence of capitalism. And like, those resources and what they go to are going to shift in this phase that's coming.
And I guess with that comes risk, right?
With that comes risk. And with reward. That, right. Yeah. And I think the human thing though at its core is that we still as humans have great agency in what we get. And, so anyhow, that's the pontificating version is like, I hope that we become more intentional in America about it. Don't know that we have the greatest track record, but.
You joined Google back when it was still a scrappy pre-IPO company. You ended up working on critical projects, internal systems to manage Google Ads revenue, and later as the product manager for Google News, where you helped roll out to 40 countries. What was it like being at Google during that hyper growth phase? Are there any lessons or crazy stories from launching something like Google News globally, or creating a feature as ubiquitous as Google suggests? Fun fact, you literally created the feature that was the autocomplete that we all use.
I mean, Kevin actually created it, but it was noteworthy to help get it out into the world. Yes. I sometimes think of it as like it's an early example of some of the things we're now doing, because it is like predictive off of behavior of humans, And I mean, the crazy stories, yes, there's all startups go through their crazy moments where it feels like you're driving a car down the Autobahn, and there's a crazy driver jamming on the gas and the wheels are falling off, and you have to figure out how to swap the wheels as you're driving without stopping. So like I've used that analogy before, but that's how it felt like, there's not time in those modes of hypergrowth to, time is one of the most critical factors, time and people. And like, it was really important to really spend almost a third of our time recruiting the next group of people in, because that was actually how we would get out of the problem. When you're 700 people managing a thing that's going exponential, you must go get more people. But like the compounding effects of people mean that they better be the right people, or you're going to make even more work for yourself. So like as an entrepreneur, this shows up in a bunch of ways, where like when you're late hiring for a need, it's at least 6 months to find the right person. And then to get them up to speed is even further. And so like there's this compounding effect of like being on top of what those needs are and being able to predict where you're going. There were a couple cases where, and also understanding your constraints and which things are slow. So like there was an era where, the math was slightly off on how many machines were needed, and it became a real scramble, but it also forced us to become efficient and thoughtful about who got machines for what. And so I think understanding constraints, understanding time, understanding like the compounding effects of the people around you. And, another example of this is like there's a phase where that feels briefly less efficient. And I often see this in companies that are growing past 20, 30
Yeah.
people. You've probably seen this a bunch too, where like there's a period where your marginal rate of return of the new people is actually lower because you add a management overhead, you add a coordination overhead.
Yeah,
and
I
then
see
it
these
goes
bubbles at like 10
Right.
and then 30.
30 in the hundreds.
Yeah,
There's
and
another
then,
one.
like after 100
Right.
and then 500. Like
Right.
that's where I've seen it, where I'm just like, oh,
Right.
like, and the smaller you can keep things for longer is better.
Right.
And I think that's actually the real power and promise of AI. Like I have one of my core values inside my company is headcount kills. Yeah, if you're in that Google moment,
Right.
like,
if you're
wheels
going
are about to fall
hyper,
off.
then you
That's
got to
great,
do
but
it.
I actually think most founders feel like they're like, oh my God, I'm in hypergrowth. I just had 20% month over month. And it's like, this isn't hypergrowth.
Right. So that's a good point, because the other thing is like that it's the compounding again. And so one of the things that we were always encouraged to do was like launch as early as possible, get feedback early. Part of it is the compounding effect. Like if you look at the early Google traffic charts, because they're up on the wall on like the crayon graph of traffic over time, the line looks relatively flat. And then it starts to pick up, and then it picks up. And exponential things, like they go exponential. And so, you watch it and then the graph has to change the axis, right? It's logarithmic. But the early phase, it's flat. It looks flat. You're like, is it growing? It's 20. If it's 20% and it's compounding, you're going to do great.
Yeah.
And you actually better start getting prepared.
Yeah.
But if it's 20% and it was a one-time thing that got you there, then, you're not quite there. Where you should be going into hyper team growth mode.
I mean, 10 to 30% month over month is a lot to metabolize because you're 3xing a year. But, I've been in businesses where it's, one day it's just like, or 1 week or 1 month. It's a crazy spurt of growth.
Right.
And so I've always wondered sort of how that felt like within Google, because you're going from billions, millions to billions.
Yeah.
Maybe trillions. I don't know.
Yeah. And there's
maybe a Googleplex.
Yes. There's Googleplexes of a few types in that data.
So then what drove you from your founding story? You then went on to found Aardvark. So Aardvark was a social search engine. What got you to found that company and why? And
I mean, there were a few things happening. And so one of the things is to put it again in time. Like in that place in time, we had seen the emergence of, MySpace, Friendster, Orkut, Facebook. Facebook was opening up their graph. People were building games on top of it. And, for me, this is where like the social scientist side of me sort of started to be like, oh, people are going to do things that are more purposeful with that. Like we'd been personalizing Google's results and personalizing Google News. And people should be able to get better real world utility from the people in their networks, that like figuring out how to do that was something that was meaningful. And there were lots of ways we could imagine, but that was the crux of it. And I think
I still want that.
Yeah. I still hear that there are still people who were early Aardvark fans who are still not happy that we, sold the company and, the product went away. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the pieces of advice I got at that time from one of my people who was a respected advisor within the company was like, look, you want to find a vantage point where you can see the shape of the trends around you. And Google at that point was such a vantage point where we could really see what was coming, what was changing. I think I had been told by someone in the Facebook world that they were about to open up their platform. We knew Android was coming, could kind of predict that the iPhone was coming and people were going to have more portable computing with them in more powerful ways than the BlackBerry with its little keyboard at the time that changed how I navigated Paris. But I mean, I think that was a lot of the impetus, was like believing that there would be something that could be meaningfully created. We didn't actually go into it knowing what we were going to build. We actually set out saying we weren't going to write code for 6 months while we just focused on people and customers and prototyping, like with fake it before you make it type interactions. We pretended to be robots that did things that people, experienced and got feedback. And actually one of our businesses that we set out and prototyped in that way, we, as co-founders, we were really struggling to kind of come in to the office. And we're like, why? So we did self-reflection, for ourselves on that. And it was a business that would have been a good business. Several have been created. They're still good businesses. They just weren't a business we wanted to create. And so we moved away from that onto the next experiment. And one of those was Aardvark.
Yeah. Is that why you decided to sell back to Google? Or what was like what was sort of the impetus of like going back to your old stomping grounds when you sold the company?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big impetuses is when you go back knowing that you can have a a a, a bigger footprint to, you know, change the world through. So there is that, like, there's lots of different motivations behind M&A and startup exits. But I think that's usually one of the strongest is to feel like, okay, if I go there, I can have a much more certain chance of having a great impact. And that didn't necessarily mean Aardvark would live on, but it did mean that we shaped how, Google was still very anonymous at the time, and now it's a ubiquitous, login on the internet. And I think that was something that the team on the other side was a big part in shaping, because of our belief that those social relationships and that data mattered a lot.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you play chess, but Civilization, I know you're a fan of, and it's similar. Like, you can never predict the end game based on the start of the game. You don't go into a startup thinking you're going to sell. I think you could certainly engineer an exit a little bit by aligning certain characteristics of what you do. We were going at a problem with Aardvark of, like, the things that humanity hadn't written down that were the subjective things that tended to be valuable, right? And getting people to write in natural language and connecting them with other humans on the other end who were in their network, who knew about it. And so I think that, the essence of that was very aligned with challenges Google had and also things that they valued, right?
That makes a ton of sense. And I think I love asking founders about why they choose to sell their businesses, because I think there's so many different motivations. Like, I sold my last business because I was like, I do not want to be the CEO of an insurance company.
Right.
Like, that does not bring me joy.
Right.
At the time, I couldn't say it that clearly because many reasons, because I didn't have that perspective or presence. But now I can look at that and it's clear.
Right. That was underneath it all.
Yeah.
And then
it opened up to create such a cooler business that I'm very into now. And so I love poking into why we create and why we sell businesses.
Yep.
So then tell me about your next business. So why'd you create your next business?
Yeah. I mean, a little bit of the wine story that we talked about earlier, but that the product is better because of the friend who finds it. So in the Aardvark user testing, we would see these cases where the person would search for something, go to Google, click on the first search result and read the first search result. And then they would ask through Aardvark, and a friend would answer their question, and they would ask the same question they were searching for. And then when we would interview them, we're like, well, the words that you got back from the human are like the same thing that was on that top web page. So why did you still ask? And the answer they would tell us is that the web page didn't convince them, but the person did. And so there's a psychology that that my second company got built around, that was around that notion of human recommendations, that the power of a person in the moment actually makes the purchasing decision psychology really different. And so this was in the era of YouTube starting to get big and Pinterest. And so there was, before influencer marketing had really taken off, it's how do you make that possible for people to recommend any product in the world and make it buyable, so that as a shopper you could experience, there's a guy in one of the towns around Napa who's got a men's clothing store that I walk in, he's got my favorite shirt designer, he's got my money clip, he's got my, and I'm like, okay, if this guy recommends something, I want to be able to buy it easily. And so doing that and putting people into the economics was the purposefulness of that company. And
Interesting.
And it flowed from some of those human
I love all your businesses. They're all so married with the human and technology side. And so Walmart acquired that business, right?
Yes.
And so you went from a long time at Google to then working your business that got acquired by Walmart, and then you were at Walmart Labs. Can you tell me a bit about that? And obviously that must have been a big culture change.
Huge
as well, but they're a prolifically huge business that engages with probably as many users as Google does.
Well, yeah, and actually also the size of the organization was one of the things that I think was notable for me. Of just after the People's Liberation Army, I think it's the largest organization in the world. Just kind of, is that
crazy?
I think that's the stat. I think it's that, or maybe the DoD is ahead too, the PLA, the DoD, and then Walmart. And and so this was we went in with a view on how to help these new types of commerce experiences exist. And a lot of the challenges that I ran into actually became part of why I took on the global data science and personalization teams across all of Walmart's businesses, because like my teams on the other side couldn't build the experiences we wanted to build because there wasn't a shared understanding infrastructurally of the customer. And so that became the challenge that I wanted to solve, so that you could do amazing things for someone who was, signing up for, grocery shopping online for the first time and actually know about the things they'd bought before, which 15-minute experience to set up your first cart versus a 1-minute experience. Like there's real
I feel like
value
there's
there.
still not the level of personalization that we could have. And I actually thought, I think like Instagram gets decently what I'm looking for, but then it like the algorithm gets thrown off. Like it's so interesting how you marry capitalism and making money from advertisers, but also then building good stuff that like the users really want.
Right.
Like you obviously have had a window into this across Walmart and Google and all these big tech companies. Like, how do you walk that line between making money and following the market and then recommending something that's like actually useful to me as a user?
One of my favorite, and I did not necessarily come up with this, but there was a Google Ventures would host a CEO summit, and one of the sought after talks was this CEO who did the CEO handbook. And I don't know if it's public, but like one of my favorite things about it, this is me as like, my political economy side coming through, but he talked about metrics and finding like really having a North Star metric, but like a lot of people,
dude, I love this topic.
They come up with a metric that is the metric they can measure now, rather than the metric they should measure. And some of these things are hard or almost impossible to measure, but it's useful to still define what it would mean for your customer to be fulfilled. Like stopping at conversion is actually a huge mistake that commerce companies and startups make all the time, because if you buy the thing, it shows up at your house and breaks 10 seconds later. Or my wife's favorite story where like she needed forks for a thing and she bought them on Amazon and she ended up getting like tiny dollhouse sized forks. Like that's an example of something that showed up in their data as a purchase that was successful, because she didn't return it. She didn't like go and rate it poorly because it was the product they said it was. She just made a mistake by not realizing the size. So it was their fault because they had a customer who bought something that she shouldn't have bought because it didn't solve her problem. It wasted her time. It wasted her money, but it shows up as a successful conversion. And so if you optimize for the wrong metric, you get the wrong thing. And so I like this idea in auction theory. There's the notion of like a Vickrey auction or a dominant strategy auction, where everyone has their one true number and the auction structure is such that you should always give your true number. I kind of talk to founders sometimes, the geekier ones who like this stuff, about dominant strategy metrics, which is like your metric that you drive, your North Star metric should actually represent what true success would look like. Like if it's about your customer feeling fulfilled at home, then say that, even if you can't actually measure it yet.
So this is something I don't think people like founders think about enough. I don't know if this is true or not, but I heard that the Collisons and for Stripe, they had one unified metric since like early days in the company, and it was total card spend divided by manual support hours. And the thesis was, all their competitors, you had to talk to a sales rep and had to do a huge engineering sprint, and you had to manually integrate with your payment processor. And they were like, we want to be fast and available to e-com, but then we also don't want a human to have to talk to someone to set up their payment and accept their payment. And so anyone at any given time in the company could be like, how do I move that metric? Well, I can sell more customers or I can build stuff to automate having people come in and talk to people.
Yes.
At the same time, you could also show that every board meeting and to every investor and be like, look, if this goes up and to the right, we're growing and we're growing the way we want. And I've always loved that. And that story's always stuck with me. And so I just think that we try to stick to these ARR metrics, or where I'm like, revenue's not a metric. Like what's your product market fit metric? Like what is the true, like what are you trying to do with your business?
I mean, I think they're underneath almost all the great companies. You can find examples of this that are really well done. Like Tony at DoorDash, his mom was a small business owner, and so he grew up in the restaurant business, if I remember right. And it was like all the problems in the back of house that they dealt with to manage pizza delivery. So like, if you think of it as like not just trying to sell more stuff to consumers, but actually about like helping that business owner run their business more efficiently. It's in his ethos of why DoorDash does some of the things they do. is about supporting those businesses in that way, similar to
That's
the
very cool.
Collison's metric. And Medium has one of these too. Like, Evan wanted to maximize, not just click rate, but like actual like time spent reading, that you would optimize for a longer, more thoughtful type of content. And I'm probably doing that metric an injustice because I don't know that I captured it exactly right there. But the idea being, but yeah, if you can thoughtfully articulate why the problem for your customer would show up in that type of metric, yeah. And so when you optimize in low price and you ignore live better, you don't necessarily get a good outcome, which is why for Walmart it was like save money, live better. You go to the corporate headquarters in Bentonville, they don't have a frilly office. Like the conference rooms are in a concrete building with no windows, and you're there negotiating as a merchant to sell your stuff. And the cupboard doors are not fancy, right? The coffee, there's free coffee, but it has the price written on it of like, if you use this paper coffee cup, that's 2 cents. That's 2 pennies that we then will have to charge higher prices to customers.
Bezos supposedly was the same way,
right?
Where it's like in the early days of Amazon, he'd come in a conference room because I knew someone who worked there, and if there was like, where'd this new TV come from, or where'd this new mount come from, and I think in the early days you had to go to Home Depot and get a door to make that your table,
right?
Because that was like the cheapest way to go make a desk,
right?
The culture is a real thing. One of my favorite hacks in my business is no matter what, I fly economy. And then I'm like, for one, like if we're taking investor money, like that's how I fly.
Right.
But then also it puts a lot of pressure on the business for anyone else. And you could upgrade yourself, but it just puts a lot of pressure on anyone else to book something that's not economy if you, the CEO, are booking it that way.
Right.
And so like that's what I picked this stuff up from a lot of bank CEOs cared about efficiency ratios, and I started in banking. And so I sort of figured out, as strict as you are as the CEO, everyone will like fall in. And if you're not as strict, like everybody kind of like you set the tone in the business.
Yep. Everybody, yes. CEO as a founders too. Like I don't think it's just the CEO. The whole founding team gets really observed by the rest of the team. And so, your behaviors become really part of the ethos of what you're creating. And that's, I think, one of the coolest things about being a startup founder is actually that you're trying to create something that lives on beyond you. And that's not just true for your team as well as your product, because it's like there's a cool moment when you're like, it'll live past me. And, you can do that as an engineer with a thing you release that's open source. You could do it as like a product. But as a business, it's like that feedback loop of like, oh, the team would keep executing on this even if I wasn't here, is a really cool moment that happens in the startup journey.
That's how I've also thought about like having a kid. It's like a startup, like it's like a little startup of a human. So, you presented this interesting idea, like being less public and sometimes be more effective.
Yeah.
And after your early, Google track record and your startup exits, you've been under the radar a bit.
Yeah.
Can you explain that philosophy to people and like, kind of your thinking around that?
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple,
aside from coming on this podcast,
which I'm, again, back to the earlier point, I respect this podcast a great deal because of what you've talked about for mental health, like there's a bunch of characteristics that for me are meaningful that I think need to be talked about more. And because of my relationship with you, I want to be here. And those are, and also to help the other founders out there and the other people in society who I think will have a new generation of entrepreneurs that's going to happen, that's going to be empowered to do things like never before. So lots of reasons I'm here today, I think. But the analogy I'll draw is like as an investor. So I've had I've been investing now for close to more than 20 years. And what's really interesting is when you're public, it changes the mix of who comes to you. And so most investors are jockeying for publicity in the attention economy.
Yes.
To try to be the loudest voice in the room and, get deal flow. And I've always like found the appeal of the people who are the investors who don't play that game, but instead like have a distinct way of operating that the entrepreneurs are drawn to them. And so that's one of my examples is like, I'm not public, but I've had some of my best deals come to me because they know and respect my work and my history, and I don't have to sort through a million other emails. So that's.
I feel like that's even more amplified with AI. Like on my phone, I don't answer any phone numbers I don't know anymore.
Right.
I'm very like emails, like filtering is the same way, LinkedIn messaging same way. And it's really hard to get through now because it's so much easier. Like before, you could notice someone's wrote like a really personal message about aardvark, but now we do this podcast, that all's out there, and like AI could write you a very personalized message. And so it's like, how you discern that, I think is becoming, at least for me, more challenging.
Right. One of my colleagues was talking about how there's some psychology research and just about different facets of people, and that like when you blog, this was from the blogging era, but like the idea of your blog is a different facet of you than like you.
Yeah.
Like these are your facets out there in the world. They don't actually represent you fully. And so I think fundamentally, like part of it is when you're doing broadcasting type work, it kind of misses some of that fundamental depth of the human connection. And so like a little bit of my kind of thesis overall is like, if you just focus on that, you'll break through the noise in a different way because you'll have strong relationships. You'll have a strong network. You'll do meaningful work that matters, that people will then, it will come back to you for. The other way is a little bit of like a race to the bottom, right? We're all going to be so deluged with AI powered emails that like, how will we'll all have separate email addresses for the people we actually know. I mean, I'm already seeing it happen.
Well, Apple already built that functionality, and there's multiple platforms that have built functionality, and it's like, don't give your email. And then I have 2 different services that like scrub all my stuff.
Right. I think it becomes important to build the right relationships and those right. What's interesting is the human network has a nice way of passing things along because it's a multi-game theoretic society we live in. So like if someone writes on an email that a friend of mine, for example, wrote the other day on an email to me, like, I actually wrote this. That's what they put under their like signature. It's only believable because I know them. Yeah. And I know that if they weren't telling the truth, I would find out eventually. And they know that. And so therefore they don't lie.
I tried to do this was before AI or video generation was a thing, for sales outbound to small businesses. I literally made a video and like held up a sign. It's like, I like your coffee shop, like talk to me. That email did not convert, but that was my idea. I was like, how do I show like I actually want to talk to you? Right. So we talked a bit earlier about acts of kindness and karma and how you want to help people, about like small moments or acts of kindness that people did in the past. Can you think of a little moment or person in your life that made a really big difference, maybe more than they realized?
Yeah.
And like how someone did that for you?
I mean, I have a couple, but there's one of the fun ones is like Eric Schmidt's advice to me. I was very lucky. I had Eric as my executive mentor.
Oh, that's cool.
My first month of Google. And then I had a different one later, but like his advice was always carry a notebook and a pen and write when people are talking to you, because then they'll know you're listening to them. So it's like listening as a big theme there that I took away from that has been, and to observe the like people around you want to emulate. So those were a couple bits of wisdom I got from someone who's notable. But for the story I think that comes to mind most for what you're asking is actually a friend of mine I grew up with who probably still to this day doesn't know the power of what he did. But my friend Nick Elliott took me for a run around our subdivision, which is a mile loop. Mm-hmm. And he lived, a half mile away. His dad was a famous runner. And, I'd been like, I'm kind of, interested in running. And he was, a cross country runner. And he took me for my first real run. And I liked it. So I did cross country and I went on to be an athlete. And that's part of why I, broke through some of my shyness as a kid because of those competitive relationships. And like, so that moment has like this whole cascade kind of butterfly effect style through my life. And you're like, well, which me do you get if that doesn't happen? If he didn't do that, if he was too busy that day?
Yeah. I think we all as founders have that thing.
Yeah.
It's like, what is that thing that is the outlet that is not building your company?
Right.
That helps build you as a person.
Right.
And I think that's a really important message to get out there.
Yeah.
So my last question, what would you tell, if you had a time machine, what would you tell your 20-year-old self about advice that you'd have?
I mean, I think probably the biggest is not just to listen. And I think your focus on mental health is a good topic here that's related to it, of like, listen more to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
sooner. And there are practices and hacks that you can do to do that. Like one of my favorite is to like write the thing you're thinking you want to do and sign it the night before you go to bed and then see how you feel about it in the morning.
Oh, I love that.
So that's a fun one I use with a lot of founders. But I think for me, it was a different journey. So my sister-in-law and brother-in-law are Zen Buddhists. And I think in my younger self, I wouldn't have, I kind of didn't appreciate the inward search and the balance of that. I probably would have brushed it off if you were interviewing my 20-year-old self.
Yeah.
Of like, oh yeah, that's a waste of time. Let's go for a run.
Yeah.
For me, running was meditative. I would solve problems on my runs. It's like the whole endorphin and clear mind and, so I had an outlet that kind of did that for my brain, but I didn't actually give it the purposefulness it should have. And I think my older self came to appreciate the journey of that inward self-reflection. So just as much as the story of like, listen to your customers, listen to the world, listen to the people around you, have those strong networks, listen to yourself is maybe one of the like deeper ones that like, I think I understand better now. And I'm not to say I'm great at it. I mean, my I mean, there's places in my own life right now where I'm like, oh yeah, that was not a great moment.
I talk a lot about my anxiety and my battle with it, or I don't even call it a battle, but like me recognizing it, and then it actually is like a strength, or it could be a weakness depending on any given day on how I approach it. Listen to yourself is definitely a key part of that, but it's like also like you're not alone. You're not like I think especially as a founder, you're like, oh, I have anxiety. Like no one else is like that, or like, oh, like this, I have this main problem. Like I'm this, and it's like no, like there's a lot of people that feel this way, and for me, when I shared that I've had chronic anxiety my whole life, I had just this huge outpouring from my audience, and I had so many people reach out to me personally and be like, I had this too. Thank you so much for saying this. Thank you so much for talking about it. And I was like, man, why haven't I? And I was so like nervous to talk about it. I was like, why didn't I talk about it sooner? And then now it's like, I'm hoping that there's some kid out there with anxiety that's like, this is going to make me a great startup founder because I can think of 10 permeations in once.
Completely. I mean, I think we were talking about this earlier, and just there's the untalked about topics in some societies, and it's different globally in different societies. But we were talking a little bit. And what's interesting is like you can't put some things out into the public too. Some things you can. I have a founder in my portfolio who's neurodivergent, and she has been. I have a network of people who have neurodivergence, and I think even that word is interesting because we're all neurodivergent, and I'm neurodivergent. So there's it's like listen to yourself to understand yourself, and don't be afraid to talk about it even if you can't talk about it publicly. And that's the strength of network and real human relationship. It's like if you have someone you can trust, I'm not going to email about it. I don't know that I want it on the internet to be slurped into an AI model, which is actually a real problem for AI training. But that's a whole subject. But I think where we get to do that is in our human relationships, and so focusing there,
rather than neurodivergent, those are the things that make us unique. And any given day, ADHD, but that actually might make you like really focused about certain things, or be able to context switch, or you might have anxiety and you could do different things. Or like I have a family member with bipolar and depression, and she was it actually in one of her manic states caused her and her husband to move across the country, but then ended up great outcomes for the family. And that, so I think there's like magic and beauty in all of that, instead of like, we need to fix all this and this is wrong. And more important to folks out there, I've personally done on my health journey. And I think that there's a lot of like hope you can bring to people. And I've been wanting to like, thank you for bringing that up. And I've been wanting to share with as well, because I want to give hope to like all those couple out there that want a family,
And it's a hard journey. There's a psychology of of your own doubt, like,
Yes.
Will this happen? And it's heavy. And I think your point about not flying the plane when you're, in a state where you're not equipped to is a really important one for CEOs and founders to hear of like, it's sometimes important to know when not to come in.
Dude, I had a loss, and then an hour later, I went to an investor pitch and did not close that investor. Why? For many reasons, but it's like I'm definitely not representing the company that well in that moment. And so that's sort of the message out there. It's like you can't you have to listen to yourself, like you were saying.
Right.
You can't force yourself through things.
Right.
And I also think that's kind of like Buddhist in a way. It's like you have to just go with the flow and go with the energy of the universe on this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I also think that there should be, I don't know, like I want this portion to be slurped up into the AI models, because
Right.
I want the founders out there who are trying to have families or who are going through this to know that like we're successful founders and like we've gone through this, and
Right.
there's hope, and there's good stuff from it. Do you have any advice on this front for any founders out there?
Don't put your life on hold.
Yeah.
I think, being a whole human can make you a better founder, because it connects you with your customers who are in the world. And that's different for everybody. So like there's, and it shows up in totally different ways. So like for, some people I know at some eras in their life, it was really important that the meeting ended at 4:45 so that they could get to their daughter's soccer game.
Yeah.
And that was the cause of burnout for them, would have been missing that soccer game. And so the meeting needed to stop at 4:45 for them. But they were fine being online for phone calls with their team in India at 2 a.m., right?
What's so interesting is so many prolific CEOs and founders have families, have kids,
Right.
and they have amazing relationships with them.
Right.
And I've actually, because I was like very curious about, and I might do a special episode in my podcast about this, but I've started picking up like the dad advice and the boundaries CEOs and founders have put in place around their lives.
Yep.
And, some stop and have dinner every night.
Right.
One really prolific, and this is a very big company CEO,
Right.
like in the top 25 companies. So I need to get his permission to say his name, but he basically gave his sons and daughter a bat phone and was like, you call this, I will immediately pick up no
Right.
matter what.
Right.
And he led
Love
his
that.
staff and team. He's like, I will pick this up. And like, I might not be able to take it. I'll be like,
Right.
hey, I'm going to talk to you in a little bit, or I'll call you
Right.
back in an hour. But that gave his children the idea
Permission
that he had
was there.
priority and that they had priority. And it was actually at a time
Yeah.
when he had to travel a lot for that big company,
Yeah, I love that.
which I love. Another gave me the advice that it's like, and well, Dane was on my podcast. He was
Right.
the CEO of Squarespace. He was like, just integrate them in your life.
Right.
And he's like, have the phone call with it.
Yes.
And I was like, Dane, this is amazing advice. And he's like, don't listen to anyone else's advice. And I was like, great.
Thor, who I think you may know,
Yeah.
he was at one of the dinner events that Francis hosted.
Yeah.
He and I were talking about this because Francis and I have had a discussion of this. The word we've been using is convergence, of like, how do you converge these parts of your life together?
Yeah.
So he told me the story that, and we can check with him before we air this, that he would, unlike the famous episode where the guy's on TV and his kid runs in and the mom drags the kid out, that was on global news during COVID. He just started inviting his kids into his meetings and his board meetings. And so like his kids got good at asking questions, and they were actually a good sounding board of like, did that make sense? But this idea of convergence, of like, how do you bring these streams of your life together so that you're better and stronger? And, Jess Ewing at Literati was one of the people who talked with me about this. I had a stressful week where I got shingles, partially because my daughter had different expectations about the week. It was like spring break, and she thought we were going to be home with her, and my wife and we were going to work the first few days of spring break, and she went to horse camp. But we'd had the wrong discussion with her. The discussion we had was like, do you like horse camp?
Oh.
And we didn't say, you're going to go to horse camp. And so Sunday night, she was, to me saying that she'd been dreaming about spring break with me since the winter. And so she was just devastated that we were taking her to horse camp so we could work. And that's just expectation setting also with the people in your life, but also the convergence discussion, which I really love, is this idea of like, how do you do things with them, which is how the old economies actually functioned. Like econos, the Greek notion of it is integrated. It's like the family farm, the family business.
Another mentor of mine owns a very large business. He actually bought a burger chain, or a diner of sorts. I won't go more specific because I don't want to reveal his identity. So his daughters could help learn business because they were like really into like the milkshakes and the stuff there.
Right.
And then he was able to teach them about business and run that whole business. And when I was in my more fearful moments, I was like, man, I'm so excited to like teach my daughter about how I'm an entrepreneur.
Right.
And then my wife's like, dude, she's probably going to be like an artist and like hate that. I'm like, I'm cool with that. Like, I just want to teach her about how we create and show her what I do. And like, I think that's incredibly cool. Nathan, I've loved this podcast.
Fantastic being here with
we
you.
hit a lot of different topics. Is there anything else you want to say or talk about?
Just how grateful I am for you doing this and being this open with founders and the world. I think it takes real courage to build something valuable like this, and I think you're doing it. So
thank you, my friend.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me on. Yeah. All right.
I'll see you soon.